The morning sun spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Maxwell Pierce's penthouse, casting long shadows across the marble floors. He adjusted his tie in the mirror, a habit he'd perfected over 15 years of marriage. Behind him, his wife Elena moved about their bedroom, her reflection catching his eye as she slipped on a simple pearl necklace, his gift from their 10th anniversary. "Will you be home for dinner tonight?" Elena asked, her voice soft but hopeful. She'd planned a special meal, though she hadn't told him why. After 3 years of fertility treatments and disappointments, she finally had news worth celebrating. Maxwell barely looked up from his watch. "Don't wait up! The Singapore merger is falling apart and I need to be on calls most of the night." Elena nodded, swallowing her disappointment. At 40, she'd grown accustomed to Maxwell's increasingly frequent late nights at the office. His tech company, Pierce Tech, had grown from a startup in their garage to a global empire worth billions. Success had changed the kind-hearted man she'd married into someone she barely recognized, someone whose ambition left little room for anything else. "I understand," she said, though the weight in her chest suggested otherwise. The pregnancy test hidden in her drawer would have to wait another day. Maxwell's driver dropped him at the gleaming glass tower of Pierce Tech's headquarters. His executive assistant, Sophia Chen, waited in the lobby, tablet in hand and coffee prepared exactly as he liked it. At 28, Sophia represented everything his company valued: youth, energy, ambition, and fresh ideas. "Good morning, Mr. Pierce," she said, falling into step beside him as they entered the private elevator. "I've rescheduled your morning meetings to give you time to review the Singapore numbers before the board call." Maxwell took the coffee, noticing the light vanilla scent of her perfume. "You're always one step ahead, Sophia. What would I do without you?" The day unfolded in a blur of meetings and crisis management. By evening, Maxwell sat in his office, loosening his tie as Sophia brought in takeout from his favorite restaurant. "You didn't have to stay," he said, watching as she arranged the containers on his desk. She looked up, tucking a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "I know the merger matters to you. Besides, I didn't have other plans." Something in her tone made him pause. They'd always maintained strict professional boundaries, but lately, he'd found himself noticing things: the curve of her smile, the intensity in her eyes when she focused, how easily she understood his vision for the company when even his wife had stopped asking about his work years ago. "Sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "You should eat too." Hours later, the Singapore crisis temporarily resolved. They found themselves sharing the last of a bottle of expensive whiskey he kept in his office. The conversation had drifted from business to personal dreams, the professional wall between them crumbling with each passing hour. "You've built something incredible," Sophia said, her eyes reflecting genuine admiration. "But sometimes I wonder if it's lonely at the top." Maxwell stared into his glass. "My wife used to understand the sacrifices. Now she just sees what I'm not giving her." The word surprised him. He never discussed his marriage with colleagues. "Perhaps she doesn't see what you're trying to build," Sophia replied, her voice gentle but emboldened by whiskey and late-night honesty. "Some people can't understand ambition like yours." He looked up, meeting her gaze. "And you do? I've watched you turn impossible ideas into reality for 3 years. You're changing the world, Maxwell. That matters." He couldn't remember the last time Elena had said his vision mattered, had called him by his first name with such conviction. Somewhere in that moment, a line was crossed. The next morning, he would tell himself it was the whiskey, the stress, the late hour that led to his hand reaching for hers across the desk. Across town, Elena sat at their dining table. Candles burned down to stubs, the special meal long cold. The pregnancy test lay face up on the bathroom counter, 2 pink lines visible in the harsh light. After 5 years of trying, countless treatments and heartbreaking disappointments, a miracle had happened. She placed a protective hand over her still flat stomach, wondering how to share the news with a husband who seemed to be slipping further away each day. When Maxwell didn't come home that night, she told herself it was the merger. When he didn't answer her calls, she assumed he was in meetings. When he finally appeared the next evening, his face grave and distant, she knew something fundamental had shifted. "We need to talk," he said, not meeting her eyes. They sat in their immaculate living room, the space between them on the sofa stretching like an ocean. Maxwell spoke of growing apart, of wanting different things, of needing space to reevaluate. The words washed over Elena in waves of disbelief. "Is there someone else?" she finally asked, her voice surprisingly steady. His hesitation was answer enough. "Sophia," she said. It wasn't a question. Maxwell's head snapped up. "How did you—" "I'm not blind, Maxwell. I've seen how you look at her at company events." Elena stood, arms wrapped protectively around herself, around their secret. 15 years together and you're willing to throw it away for someone you barely know? "It's not that simple," he said, running a hand through his graying hair. "We haven't been happy for a long time, Elena. You must feel it too." She laughed, a hollow sound. "What I feel is betrayed. What I feel is that while I've been fighting for our future, you've been planning your escape." The urge to tell him about the baby rose in her throat, but she pushed it down. Would it matter? Would he stay out of obligation, resentment growing alongside their child? She thought of the cold, distracted man he'd become and made a split-second decision. "If you want out, then go," she said, surprised by her own calm. "But don't expect me to make this easy for you." The weeks that followed passed in a blur of lawyers, paperwork, and division of assets. Maxwell, eager to start his new life, was surprisingly generous in the settlement. Elena's pride prevented her from fighting for more, despite knowing the costs of raising a child, let alone what might be coming. An early ultrasound had revealed the shocking news. Not one heartbeat, but 4. Quadruplets, the doctor had explained, were extremely rare without fertility treatments, but not impossible. She kept the news to herself, even as headlines about Maxwell's separation and new relationship splashed across business magazines. "Tech billionaire Maxwell Pierce leaves wife for younger employee," they proclaimed. The articles painted her as the neglected wife, too focused on charity work and unable to keep pace with her husband's ambition. They portrayed Sophia as the brilliant young mind who understood Maxwell's vision in ways his wife never could. Elena retreated from their social circle, unable to bear the pitying glances and whispered gossip. Only her sister knew the full truth, offering her guest house as a temporary home while Elena decided what to do next. As her body began to change, she knew she couldn't hide in the city where Maxwell's name adorned buildings and charity wings. 3 months after their separation, Elena sat in her lawyer's office signing the final divorce papers. Her loose-fitting dress concealed the small but distinct bump that housed 4 tiny lives. Maxwell hadn't asked to meet in person for the signing. Another business trip kept him away, his signatures delivered electronically from halfway across the world. "Are you sure about this?" her lawyer asked, eyeing the agreement. "The prenup limits spousal support to 5 years. With his resources, we could push for more." Elena shook her head. "I have what I need." The settlement would provide enough to start over somewhere new, somewhere their children could grow up free from the shadow of their father's abandonment and new family. That evening, as she packed the last of her belongings from their once-shared home, her phone chimed with a news alert. She almost ignored it, but something made her look. There on her screen was a photo of Maxwell and Sophia leaving a courthouse, gold bands visible on their fingers. The caption read, "Tech billionaire weds former assistant in private ceremony just 4 months after separation announcement." Elena's hand trembled as she set down the phone. 4 months ago, she'd been planning a special dinner to tell her husband they were finally going to have the family they'd dreamed of. Now he had a new wife while she carried his children he knew nothing about. As she placed a hand over the small swell of her stomach, she felt a flutter, the first movements of the babies. In that moment, Elena made her final decision. Maxwell Pierce had chosen his path, walking away from 15 years without a backward glance. She would forge her own way forward, protecting these 4 little lives from the pain of a father who hadn't wanted them enough to stay. "We'll be okay," she whispered to her unborn children as she closed the door on her old life. "We have each other. That's all we need." 7 years passed like a dream and a lifetime all at once. The coastal town of Harbor Point welcomed Elena with open arms, its salt-tinged air and slower pace exactly what she needed to heal and build a new life. Her sister Lily had joined her, leaving behind a fast-paced marketing career in the city to help with what would become the greatest challenge and joy of Elena's life. The quadruplets arrived early, tiny but fierce. 3 girls and 1 boy, each with a distinct personality from their first breath. Elena named them Nora, Violet, Ruby, and Leo. They had their father's striking blue eyes, a reminder she faced each morning, not with bitterness, but with determination to give them everything they needed without him. Leo, shoes. We're running late, Elena called up the stairs of their modest beach cottage. At 7, her son had developed a knack for disappearing whenever it was time to leave for school. He's hiding in the reading nook again, said Violet, the most observant of the 4, without looking up from her breakfast. Unlike her more outgoing sisters, she noticed everything, her quiet voice often delivering the most startling insights. Nora, the natural leader of the group, was already by the door with her backpack perfectly organized. I told him Ms. Parker is doing the volcano experiment today, but he still wouldn't hurry up. Elena found Leo exactly where Violet had predicted, curled up with a book about space travel. Future astronaut, we have exactly 7 minutes before the school bell. He looked up with Maxwell's eyes and grin. Did you know astronauts can grow almost 2 inches taller in space? The lack of gravity is fascinating, and we can discuss it on the walk to school, Elena finished, gently taking the book and helping him up. Ruby, the most creative and free-spirited of the 4, was waiting in the yard, her school uniform already adorned with a handmade beaded bracelet and mismatched socks. I made you something, Mom, she said, presenting a slightly lopsided origami bird. It's for your gallery desk. Elena's art gallery, 4 Seasons, had started as a small dream and grown into the town's cultural hub. Her own paintings, seascapes and family scenes filled with light and movement, had found a following among tourists and locals alike. The modest income, combined with careful management of her divorce settlement, kept them comfortable if not luxurious. As they walked to school, the children chattering about their upcoming day, Elena breathed in the morning air. Grateful for this life she'd built from broken pieces. She'd never told the children about their father beyond saying he wasn't part of their lives. Someday they would ask more questions, but for now, they were content with their mother, aunt, and the tight-knit community that had embraced them. Don't forget, Aunt Lily is picking you up today, Elena reminded them at the school gate. I have the gallery opening for the new artist. After kisses and hugs, Elena watched them disappear into the brick schoolhouse, 4 distinct personalities moving as a unit. They protected each other fiercely, a bond formed before birth that amazed everyone who knew them. Across the country, Maxwell Pierce stared out the window of his penthouse office, unseeing. The view of the city skyline, once a daily reminder of his success, now felt hollow. 7 years had brought even greater wealth and recognition. Pierce Tech had quadrupled in value, expanding into artificial intelligence and clean energy. But his personal life lay in ruins. His marriage to Sophia had crumbled after just 3 years, her ambition eventually turning toward her own career advancement, rather than supporting his. The divorce had been messy in public, with accusations and counter-accusations splashed across media outlets. He'd retreated further into work afterward, his reputation as a brilliant but cold businessman firmly cemented. Mr. Pierce, the board is waiting, his new assistant said from the doorway, her tone professionally distant. No one got too close these days. Maxwell nodded, straightening his tie. The company faced its first major crisis in years, a security breach that threatened their newest AI platform and had sent stocks tumbling. The board was panicking, shareholders were demanding answers, and his leadership was under scrutiny for the first time in his career. The meeting went as badly as expected. Board members questioned his recent decisions, barely concealing their concerns about his mental state. He'd become increasingly withdrawn and erratic since his second divorce, working obsessive hours yet missing important details. We need solutions, not excuses, said Thomas Wang, the newest board member, voicing what others had only implied. Perhaps it's time to consider a different approach. Maxwell understood the threat beneath the suggestion. They were discussing replacing him. The company he'd built from nothing could slip from his grasp if he didn't turn things around quickly. Give me 2 weeks, he said, his voice finding its old authority. I'll personally oversee the security rebuild and unveil a new direction at the tech conference in Harbor Point. This setback will become our biggest opportunity. He hadn't planned to attend the smaller coastal tech conference, but now it offered perfect timing, a venue away from the usual spotlight where he could regroup and formulate a plan. Only after the meeting did his assistant remind him that Harbor Point was where Elena had moved after their divorce. He dismissed the information as irrelevant. Their paths were unlikely to cross in a town of 30,000 people, and even if they did, their lives had diverged completely. That evening, alone in his vast apartment, Maxwell scrolled through news headlines about Pierce Tech's troubles on his tablet. The business publications were speculating about his future with the company, some even suggesting he'd lost his edge. An old photo accompanied one article, him and Elena at a charity gala in happier times. He stared at her face, realizing he hadn't thought about her in years. What had happened to her? The divorce agreement had included a non-disclosure clause that prevented either of them from speaking publicly about their marriage. He'd never looked her up, assuming she'd remarried and moved on. Now, faced with his own professional crisis, he found himself wondering if she'd found happiness after him. A week later, Maxwell arrived in Harbor Point, settling into the best suite at the town's small luxury hotel. The conference wouldn't begin for 2 days, giving him time to clear his head and develop the innovation that would save his company and legacy. The town was prettier than he'd expected, with its Victorian architecture and sweeping ocean views. Walking along the main street that first evening, he found himself drawn to a small but elegant art gallery with warm light spilling onto the sidewalk. Four Seasons Gallery, the sign read, showcasing a painting of 4 small children running on a beach, their faces turned away but their joy unmistakable. Something about the painting stopped him in his tracks. The technique was remarkable, light captured in a way that made the scene almost breathe with life. He entered without thinking, the quiet of the space a welcome relief from the constant noise in his head. The front room featured local landscapes, but a larger back gallery showcased the artist who'd created the beach scene, a collection titled Quartet. Maxwell moved slowly through the exhibit, struck by the emotional power of the works. Each painting featured the same 4 children in different settings, reading under a tree, building sandcastles, sleeping in a pile like puppies. Their faces were always obscured or turned away, but their connection to each other radiated from every canvas. "They're special, aren't they?" said a voice behind him. The artist has a way of capturing childhood that makes everyone feel nostalgic for something they might never have experienced themselves. Maxwell turned to find an older woman with kind eyes watching him. "The gallery owner?" "Just the evening manager," she smiled. "Lily Chen. The owner is my sister, but she's handling a client dinner tonight." Chen. The surname triggered no recognition. Elena had apparently returned to her maiden name after their divorce. "These children," Maxwell said, turning back to the painting. "They seem so real." "That's her gift," Lily replied, finding the universal in the personal. Something about the woman's careful assessment made Maxwell wonder if she knew who he was. Many people recognized him from business publications or news reports. "I'd be interested in acquiring one for my corporate headquarters," he said, his standard response when art impressed him. "Is the artist local? I'd like to commission something specific." Lily's smile remained friendly, but her eyes turned cautious. "She is. If you leave your contact information, she can reach out about a commission." As Maxwell wrote his name and number in the gallery's leather-bound contact book, he noticed Lily's slight intake of breath. "Maxwell Pierce," she read, her voice carefully neutral. "I'll make sure she gets this." Outside again, walking back to his hotel, Maxwell couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened. The paintings had stirred something long dormant in him, a longing for connection, for family, for something beyond the next business success. His phone rang, pulling him back to reality. It was his development team with news about the security breach. It was worse than they'd thought, with customer data potentially compromised. Tomorrow would require his full attention. The art gallery and its haunting paintings temporarily forgotten. What Maxwell couldn't know was that less than a mile away, Elena sat across from her sister in their cottage kitchen, staring at his name in the gallery contact book with shaking hands. "What did he say? Did he recognize you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," Lily assured her. "He has no idea. But Elena, he was drawn to the children's paintings. All of them. What are you going to do?" Elena closed the book, her mind racing. For 7 years, she'd built a life without Maxwell Pierce. For 7 years, she'd protected her children from the knowledge that their father had walked away before even knowing they existed. Now he was here, in their town, admiring paintings of his own children without recognizing them. The careful boundaries between their worlds had suddenly collapsed, and she had no idea what would happen next. Elena barely slept that night. The knowledge that Maxwell was in Harbor Point just minutes away left her restless and uneasy. By morning, she'd made her decision. She would avoid any contact with him. The tech conference lasted only 3 days. Surely they could manage to stay out of each other's path in that time. "You should call him," Lily said over coffee, the children's voices drifting down from upstairs as they prepared for school. "He expressed interest in your work. This could be a significant commission for the gallery." Elena shook her head firmly. "I can't risk it." "What if he sees the children?" "The resemblance is there, Lily. Anyone looking closely enough would notice." Lily sighed. "It's been 7 years, Elena. He's not the same person who left you, and you're certainly not the same woman he left behind. Maybe it's time for what?" Elena interrupted. "Time to tell him he has 4 children he never knew about? Time to disrupt their lives with a father who chose to walk away? No." She stood, gathering her composure as footsteps thundered down the stairs. "The gallery will be closed for renovations while he's in town. That's final. But life rarely cooperates with such careful plans." That afternoon, while Elena handled gallery paperwork at home, the school called. Leo had fallen during recess and needed stitches on his forehead. Nothing serious. But a parent needed to come right away. At the small community hospital, Elena held Leo's hand as the doctor prepared to stitch the small gash above his eyebrow. Her normally brave son looked pale and frightened. "It's going to leave a cool scar," Elena said, trying to distract him. "Very distinguished." Leo attempted a smile that quickly turned to a wince as the doctor began cleaning the wound. "Will the other kids make fun of me?"
"No way," Elena said firmly.
"Besides, your sisters would never let that happen." As if summoned by her words, the door burst open and the 3 girls rushed in, Lily following behind with an apologetic look. "They insisted," she explained. "I couldn't get them to stay at school once they heard Leo was hurt." Nora immediately took charge, moving to Leo's other side and holding his free hand. "We're here now. You'll be okay." Violet hung back, her eyes wide with concern, while Ruby climbed straight onto the examination table beside her brother. "Can I watch the stitching?" she asked the startled doctor. "I want to be a doctor or maybe an artist or possibly an astronaut veterinarian." The doctor smiled despite himself. "You'll need to sit over there with your aunt, but I'll explain what I'm doing." The small examination room was crowded but filled with the love and solidarity that had always defined their family unit. When the doctor finished, Leo proudly sported 4 small stitches and a superhero bandage. "Ice cream?" he asked hopefully, his trauma already becoming a badge of courage. Elena laughed, relieved the ordeal was over. "Definitely ice cream, for everyone." The small ice cream parlor by the harbor was nearly empty in the mid-afternoon lull. Elena watched her children debate flavors with the seriousness of international negotiators, grateful for these ordinary moments that made up their extraordinary life together. "Mint chocolate chip, please," said a familiar voice behind them in line. "In a cup, not a cone." Elena froze, her back to the voice she would recognize anywhere. Maxwell. Here, now, just feet away from his children. She fought the urge to gather the quadruplets and flee. "Mom, I want strawberry and chocolate," Leo was saying, unaware of her sudden panic. "1 scoop is enough," she managed to say, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. As the children collected their treats and moved to a table by the window, Elena finally turned, coming face to face with Maxwell Pierce for the first time in 7 years. He looked older, of course. His dark hair was now streaked with gray at the temples and fine lines framed his eyes. But the confident stance, the expensive watch, the way he filled a room with his presence, those things hadn't changed. Recognition dawned slowly in his eyes. "Elena?" She nodded stiffly, wishing desperately for invisibility. "Maxwell." His gaze moved from her to the table where the quadruplets sat, their backs to him as they concentrated on their ice cream. "Are those my children?" she said simply. "Yes." A shadow crossed his face, surprise, confusion, perhaps a hint of something deeper. "I didn't know you had children." "There's a lot we don't know about each other's lives," she replied, turning to join the quadruplets at their table. "Enjoy your time in Harbor Point." She felt his eyes follow her as she walked away, but she didn't look back. At the table, she positioned herself so that her body partially blocked his view of the children, especially Leo, whose profile most clearly reflected his father's. "Who was that man?" Violet asked softly, her perceptive eyes missing nothing. "Just someone I used to know," Elena answered, keeping her voice light. "From my old life in the city." But Maxwell hadn't moved from his spot near the counter even after receiving his ice cream. Elena felt her anxiety rising as he seemed to study the children with growing interest. Finally, he approached their table. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, his business-polished voice careful and measured, "but I believe I visited your gallery yesterday. The paintings were extraordinary." Elena's heart hammered in her chest. "Thank you. The gallery's closed for renovations this week, unfortunately." Maxwell's eyes moved between the 4 children, lingering momentarily on each face. Did he see himself in them? Could he possibly suspect? "Are these your children?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "The subjects of your paintings?" Before Elena could answer, Ruby spoke up with her usual lack of filter. "Mom paints us all the time. She says we're her favorite subject in the whole world." Maxwell smiled at her, and Elena saw the dangerous resemblance between their expressions. "I can see why. You have very interesting faces." "I got stitches today," Leo announced proudly, pointing to his bandaged forehead. "4 of them." "Very impressive," Maxwell replied, his gaze now fixed intently on the boy. "I have a scar too, right here." He pointed to a faint line near his hairline. Elena stood abruptly. "We should be going. The children have homework." Maxwell stepped back, his expression unreadable. "Of course. It was nice meeting all of you." To Elena, he added, "Perhaps we could talk about that commission before I leave town. I'm staying at the Harbor Hotel." Elena nodded non-committally, already gathering the children's trash and ushering them toward the door. Outside on the sidewalk, she exhaled shakily. "He seemed nice," Nora commented. "How do you know him, Mom?" "We worked together a long time ago," Elena said. The partial truth easier than explaining the full complexity of her history with Maxwell Pierce. "Before you were born?" That night, after the children were asleep, Elena paced the small living room while Lily watched with concern. He saw them, Lily. He was looking at them so closely. "What if he figures it out? Would that be so terrible?" Lily asked gently. "The children are going to ask questions eventually. They already wonder why they don't have a father when their friends do." Elena sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. "You didn't see his face when he realized I had children. He looked betrayed somehow, as if I'd kept something from him. Which is rich, considering how quickly he replaced me." "Maybe you're reading too much into it," Lily suggested. "It's been 7 years. Perhaps he's changed." Elena was spared from responding by a knock at the door. They exchanged alarmed glances. They rarely had visitors this late. Elena opened the door to find Maxwell standing on her porch, his expression grave in the porch light. "I apologize for coming here," he said without preamble. "Your sister gave me your address." Elena turned to glare at Lily, who shook her head in denial. "I did no such thing." "The gallery contact information," Maxwell explained. "It listed both the gallery address and your home studio." Elena sighed, remembering the business cards she'd had printed when they first opened. "What do you want, Maxwell?" He looked past her to Lily, then back to Elena. "I'd like to speak with you. Alone." The sisters exchanged a glance and Lily nodded slightly. "I'll check on the kids," she said, disappearing up the stairs. Elena stepped onto the porch, closing the door behind her. The night air was cool, the sound of distant waves a constant backdrop to life in Harbor Point. "How old are they?" Maxwell asked directly, no pretense in his voice. Elena's stomach tightened. "Why does it matter?" "They're 7, aren't they?" He pressed, his voice low but intense. "They were born after our divorce." Elena crossed her arms protectively across her chest. "Yes, they're 7. Maxwell's eyes darkened. "Were you pregnant when I left?" The direct question hung between them, weighted with 7 years of secrets and separate lives. Elena considered lying, but what would be the point now? "Yes," she admitted finally. "I found out the morning you told me you wanted a divorce." Maxwell stepped back as if she'd struck him, genuine shock washing over his features. "You never said anything. All through the divorce proceedings, you never mentioned." "What was I supposed to say?" Elena interrupted, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay calm. That I was pregnant while you were falling in love with your assistant? That I wanted to trap you in a marriage you clearly didn't want? They're mine, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Elena looked out toward the dark ocean, unable to face him as she answered, Yes, they're yours. The silence that followed felt endless, filled only with the sound of waves and distant wind chimes. When Elena finally turned back, Maxwell's expression had transformed entirely. The confident businessman was gone, replaced by a man grappling with life-altering information. I have 4 children, he said, the words clearly strange in his mouth. 4 children I never knew existed. Elena invited Maxwell inside. Some conversations weren't meant for porch steps and night air. The modest living room with its mismatched furniture and walls covered in children's artwork told the story of their lives better than words ever could. Would you like tea? She asked, falling back on politeness as a shield against the storm of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Maxwell shook his head, standing awkwardly in the center of the room. His eyes roamed over family photos on the mantel, the quadruplets as babies, as toddlers on their first day of school at the beach. 7 years of moments he'd missed, compressed into frames on a shelf. 4 children, he said again, as if still trying to process the magnitude of it. Quadruplets. It was unexpected, Elena replied, a hint of the old dry humor they once shared slipping into her voice. The doctor nearly fell off his chair during the ultrasound. Maxwell picked up a photo, the 4 children building a massive sandcastle, their faces alight with concentration and joy. Tell me about them, he said quietly. Elena hesitated, then relented. Nora is the oldest by 3 minutes. She's the natural leader, always organizing the others. Violet came next. She's quiet, observant, notices everything. Then Ruby, who's our free spirit, creative and a bit wild. Leo was last, the only boy, curious about how everything works in the world. Maxwell listened intently, his expression softening with each detail. And their health? Did the multiple birth cause any complications? They were early, of course. 6 weeks premature. But they were fighters from the start, Elena said, her voice warming with pride. Leo had some breathing issues the first year, but he's strong now. The girls have always been healthy. They seem happy, Maxwell observed, looking around at the evidence of a childhood filled with love and security. They are, Elena confirmed. We don't have everything, but they have what matters. Maxwell set down the photo, turning to face her directly. Why didn't you tell me, Elena? I had a right to know I had children. The question sparked a flare of the anger she'd buried years ago. Did you? You made it very clear our marriage was over. You were already building a new life with Sophia before the ink was dry on our divorce papers. That didn't give you the right to keep 4 children secret from me, he countered, keeping his voice low despite the intensity of his words. Whatever happened between us, they're still my children. Are they? Elena challenged. Biology doesn't make you a father, Maxwell. Being there does. Choosing to stay does. Loving them more than your own ambitions does. The words hung between them, sharp and honest. Maxwell didn't immediately respond, moving instead to the window that overlooked the small backyard with its swing set and garden. I would have done right by them, he said finally. Whatever you think of me, I would have provided for my own children. We've managed, Elena replied stiffly. We don't need your money now. Maxwell turned back, frustration evident in his expression. This isn't about money, Elena, it's about time. 7 years I can never get back. First steps, first words, first days of school. All gone. Your choice, Elena reminded him, though a small voice inside questioned whether that was entirely fair. You chose to leave. I left you, Maxwell said, his voice quieter now. Not children I didn't know existed. The painful truth of his words silenced her momentary anger. They stood in uncomfortable silence until a small noise from the staircase caught their attention. Violet sat on the middle step, her pajamas rumpled and her eyes wide as she watched them. Violet, Elena said, moving toward her daughter. You should be in bed, sweetheart. I heard voices, the girl explained, her observant eyes moving from her mother to Maxwell. You sound upset. Maxwell seemed frozen, staring at the child who was so clearly a part of him. The same serious expression he wore in childhood photos, the same thoughtful pause before speaking. We're just having a grown-up talk, Elena assured her, climbing the steps to gather Violet into her arms. Everything's fine. Is he the man from your old pictures? Violet asked softly but loud enough for Maxwell to hear. The one you never talk about? Elena felt her heart constrict. Of course Violet would have noticed. She noticed everything. Yes, she admitted. Mr. Pierce and I knew each other a long time ago. Maxwell stepped forward cautiously. Hello, Violet. I'm sorry if our talking woke you up. Violet studied him with the direct, unfiltered gaze only children possess. You have eyes like Leo's, she observed. And like mine. Maxwell's breath caught audibly. Yes, I suppose I do. Elena carried Violet back upstairs, tucking her in with promises that everything was fine and they'd talk more tomorrow. When she returned, Maxwell was sitting on the couch, looking lost in thought. She knows, he said as Elena entered, or at least she suspects. Violet notices patterns, connections. She always has. Elena sighed, sitting in the armchair across from him. The others might not have put it together yet, but she would. What now? Maxwell asked, the simple question encompassing a world of complexity. Before Elena could answer, a sharp ping from Maxwell's phone broke the moment. He checked it with a frown. I need to go. There's a crisis with the company. The security breach is worse than we thought. Elena nodded, relieved for the interruption, yet oddly disappointed. Your conference presentation is tomorrow? Yes, Maxwell confirmed, standing and straightening his jacket in a gesture so familiar it caused an unexpected pang of nostalgia. But this conversation isn't over, Elena. He paused, gathering his thoughts. I want to know my children. I have that right. After he left, Elena sat in the quiet house, the weight of the evening settling around her. She'd known this day might come, had prepared speeches and arguments in her mind, yet now felt completely unprepared for what lay ahead. The next morning brought chaos as the quadruplets prepared for school. Elena had barely slept, but the children's energy was relentless. Mom, Leo lost my homework folder, Nora complained, searching through backpacks. Did not. You left it in the art corner, Leo countered, mouth full of toast. Has anyone seen my library book? Ruby asked, upending a basket of toys. Only Violet was quiet, watching Elena with knowing eyes. Is that man coming back? She asked when the others were distracted. Elena knelt to her daughter's level. Would it bother you if he did? Violet considered this with her usual thoughtfulness. Is he important? He used to be, Elena answered carefully. To me. The school day passed in a blur as Elena tried to focus on gallery work. A text from Lily reported that Maxwell's tech conference presentation had made waves. He'd announced a revolutionary new security platform that had sent Pierce Tech stocks soaring. The business world's golden boy had apparently turned his crisis into an opportunity, just as he always had. That evening, as Elena helped the children with homework at the kitchen table, a knock came at the door. She knew who it would be before she answered. Maxwell stood on the porch again, but this time he wasn't alone. A slender man in a suit stood beside him, holding a briefcase. This is David Wong, my attorney, Maxwell said without greeting. I'd like to discuss establishing legal paternity and visitation rights. Elena's stomach dropped. Now, like this? Maxwell at least had the grace to look uncomfortable. The conference ends tomorrow. I'll be returning to the city, and I want something in place before I go. You can't just appear with lawyers and demand access to children who don't even know you exist, Elena hissed, keeping her voice low enough that the quadruplets wouldn't hear from the kitchen. I'm not demanding anything, Maxwell replied, though his tone suggested otherwise. I'm trying to handle this properly legally. Before Elena could respond, Leo's voice came from behind her. Mom, who's at the door? She turned to find all 4 children standing in the hallway, homework forgotten. Leo stepped forward curiously, and the resemblance between father and son was unmistakable as they stood within feet of each other. Maxwell's lawyer noticed it too, his professional demeanor slipping momentarily into surprise. Children, please go back to the kitchen, Elena said, trying to keep her voice steady. Are you the man from yesterday? Nora asked Maxwell directly, ignoring her mother's request. The one who knows Mom from before? Maxwell nodded, his expression softening as he looked at each of them. Yes, I am. Why do you have a lawyer? Leo asked, pointing to the man with the briefcase. Is Mom in trouble? No one's in trouble, Elena assured them quickly. Mr. Pierce and I just need to discuss some grown-up things. About us? Violet asked quietly, her perceptive eyes moving between the adults. Is it about us? The question hung in the air, impossible to dismiss or deny. Elena looked at Maxwell, a silent plea in her eyes. Not like this, not so abruptly. Maxwell seemed to understand. He turned to his lawyer and spoke quietly. The man nodded, though he looked displeased, and returned to the waiting car at the curb. "No lawyer," Maxwell said to Elena. "Just talk." Elena nodded gratefully, then turned to the children. "Yes, we need to talk about some things that involve all of you. But first, let's finish that homework. Can he help?" Ruby asked, pointing to Maxwell. "I have math problems." Maxwell's expression brightened with unexpected hope. "I'm actually pretty good at math," he said, his voice gentler than Elena had heard it in years. As they all moved into the kitchen, the quadruplets curious and Maxwell visibly nervous, Elena realized that her carefully constructed world had irrevocably changed. The truth was now a living thing between them all, impossible to contain any longer. Leo pulled out a chair for Maxwell at the table. "You can sit next to me," he offered, unaware of the significance of the simple gesture. As Maxwell took the seat beside his son, truly seeing him as his son for the first time, the emotion on his face was unmistakable. Beneath the polished exterior of the billionaire businessman, something fundamental was shifting, cracking open to reveal a vulnerability Elena had forgotten he possessed. The following weeks unfolded in ways Elena could never have predicted. Maxwell canceled his return to the city, taking up residence in a rented beach house just down the shore. His company executives were shocked when he announced he would be working remotely for the foreseeable future. But he silenced their concerns by reminding them that his recent innovation had saved Pierce Tech from disaster. He had earned this time. Telling the children the truth had been the hardest conversation of Elena's life. She and Maxwell had agreed to do it together, sitting the quadruplets down in the living room one weekend morning. "Remember how I told you that your father wasn't part of our lives?" Elena had begun, her heart hammering. "Well, sometimes life takes unexpected turns." The children listened with varying reactions as Maxwell explained that he was their father, that he hadn't known about them until now, and that he wanted very much to know them if they would let him. "So you didn't leave us on purpose?" Leo asked, his young face serious. "No," Maxwell answered honestly. "I didn't know you existed. If I had—" He paused, seeming to realize the complexity of what might have been. "If I had, everything would have been different." "Why did you leave Mom then?" Nora asked directly, her protective nature showing. Maxwell looked at Elena, uncertain how much to share. She nodded slightly, encouraging honesty within reason. "I made mistakes," he said simply. "I thought my work and success were the most important things in life. I was wrong. Are you rich?" Ruby asked, changing the subject with her typical lack of filter. "Tommy at school says billionaires have swimming pools filled with gold coins." The tension broke as Maxwell laughed. "No gold coin pools, I'm afraid. But yes, I do have money." "We don't need money," Violet said quietly. "We're happy with what we have." Maxwell's expression softened as he looked at his most perceptive daughter. "I can see that. Your mom has given you something much more valuable than money." Now 3 weeks later, they were settling into an uneasy routine. Maxwell spent afternoons with the children after school, getting to know them through homework sessions, beach walks, and long conversations. He discovered Leo's passion for space and science, Violet's remarkable artistic talent, Ruby's boundless imagination, and Nora's natural leadership abilities. To his credit, Maxwell didn't try to buy their affection. There were no extravagant gifts or promises of luxury. Instead, he focused on being present, on listening, on learning who these extraordinary children were. He attended Leo's science fair, sat through Ruby's impromptu backyard performances, helped Violet find the perfect shade of blue for a painting, and listened intently to Nora's detailed plans for her future career as a marine biologist. Elena watched this evolution with guarded hope. The Maxwell she was seeing now, patient, attentive, genuinely interested in others, was a far cry from the man who had left her 7 years ago. But people changed and then changed back. She'd learned that lesson the hard way and wasn't ready to fully trust this transformation. One evening, as Maxwell helped the children build a bonfire on the beach for s'mores, Lily joined Elena on the porch. "He's good with them," Lily observed, watching as Maxwell showed Leo how to safely light the fire. "He's trying," Elena acknowledged. "I'll give him that much. And the lawyer? Has he mentioned that again?" Elena shook her head. Not since that first night. We've agreed to informal visitation for now, with the understanding that we'll work out something more official eventually. Lily studied her sister's face carefully. And how are you feeling about all this? Elena sighed, watching as Ruby dramatically acted out a story, making Maxwell laugh. Confused. Angry still sometimes. But also relieved in a way. The children deserve to know where they came from. Who they came from. And you? Lily pressed. What do you deserve, Elena? Before she could answer, Violet broke away from the group on the beach and ran up to the porch. Mom, come on. Dad says we can't light the marshmallows on fire without adult supervision. Dad. The word still sounded strange, but the children had adopted it with surprising ease. Maxwell had teared up the first time Leo had called him that. A reaction that had softened something in Elena's heart, despite her best efforts to remain detached. As the evening progressed, with sticky marshmallow fingers and stories around the fire, Elena found herself remembering the early days with Maxwell, before ambition and success had changed him. This man, laughing as Ruby placed a marshmallow on his nose, seemed more like that young dreamer she'd first fallen in love with than the cold businessman who had left her. Later, after the children were tucked in bed, Maxwell lingered on the porch, reluctant to leave as he did most nights. They're incredible, Elena, he said softly. All of them. You've done an amazing job. They made it easy, she replied, allowing a small smile. They came into this world with such strong personalities already. Maxwell nodded, his expression turning more serious. I've been thinking about the future, about how to be a real father to them. Elena tensed slightly. What does that mean exactly? I want to be here, Elena, not just visiting. Not just sending checks or showing up for birthdays and holidays. He ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she remembered well. I'm looking at houses in Harbor Point, permanently. What about Pierce Tech? Your whole life is in the city? It was, he corrected, but I've learned something these past few weeks. The company doesn't need me physically present to succeed, and I've missed 7 years with my children. I don't want to miss another day if I can help it. Elena studied his face, looking for signs of the old Maxwell, the calculating ambition, the restless drive for more. Instead, she saw only sincerity and a vulnerability he'd never allowed himself to show before. The children would like that, she admitted. They've grown attached to you quickly. And you? Maxwell asked carefully. How would you feel about me being here permanently? The question hung between them, loaded with history and pain and possibility.
I don't know yet, Elena answered honestly.
This hasn't been easy for me, Maxwell. Seeing you with them, watching them love you so easily while I remember how easily you left. I know, he acknowledged. And I'm not asking for forgiveness, Elena. I don't deserve it. What I did to you was unforgivable. His honesty surprised her. The old Maxwell would have justified his actions, would have found a way to make himself the hero of the story. Maybe not unforgivable, she said quietly. Just not forgotten. The next day brought unexpected drama. Leo woke with a high fever, his breathing labored and painful. A quick visit to the doctor confirmed pneumonia, requiring immediate hospitalization. At the hospital, Elena paced the hallway outside Leo's room while doctors administered antibiotics and oxygen. The other children had stayed with Lily, though they'd protested fiercely at being separated from their brother. Maxwell arrived breathless, having rushed from a video conference with his executive team. How is he? He asked, genuine fear in his eyes. The doctor says he'll be okay, but his oxygen levels are low. They want to keep him overnight at least. Elena's composure finally cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. He was fine yesterday. How did this happen so fast? Without hesitation, Maxwell pulled her into his arms, offering the comfort of familiar embrace. He'll be okay, he murmured into her hair. He's strong like his mother. Elena allowed herself to lean into him just for a moment before pulling back. The doctor mentioned something concerning. Apparently Leo has a rare blood type. If he needs a transfusion, finding a match could be difficult. Maxwell frowned. What's his blood type? AB negative. It's extremely rare. That's my blood type, Maxwell said, surprise evident in his voice. I've always had to carry a medical alert card because of it. The doctor confirmed that Maxwell was indeed a perfect match, and though Leo didn't need a transfusion yet, having a parent with matching blood type on site was immensely reassuring. Through the long night, they took turns sitting with Leo, neither willing to leave. In the quiet hospital room watching their son sleep, the walls between them slow,